speaker, Dr. Don Fisher. So Dr. Don Fisher, he is the Principal Technical Advisor in Surface Transportation Human Factors at Volpe. Prior to becoming a Principal Technical Advisor, he served as a faculty fellow at Volpe for 2 years. Dr. Fisher joined the University of Massachusetts Amherst in the fall of 1982. He became the head of the Department of Mechanical Industrial Engineering in 2009 and served in that capacity until August of 2015. He received his bachelor's degree from Bowdoin, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, college, master's degree from Harvard, and his PhD from the University of Michigan. So Dr. Fisher's current research interests are in human factors and surface transportation, especially automated vehicles, distraction, and training. He is editor of the recently published Handbook of Driving Simulation for Engineering, Medicine, and Psychology, and has over 450 scientific publications and presentations. So it's my pleasure this morning to welcome Dr. Don Fisher as the kickoff speaker for the Safer Sim Virtual Symposium. Welcome, Dr. Fisher.
Welcome. Thank you, Jacob, for all your hard work putting this together, all the practice runs. I want to say hello to all my friends from the University of Iowa, University of Central Florida, UMass Amherst, University of Puerto Rico, Mayaguez. I hope you can join us, and University of Wisconsin, Madison. As Jacob said, I am now at the Volpe Center in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is officially part of the Department of Transportation. I also have a research appointment at UMass Amherst and am director there of the Arbella Insurance Human Performance Lab. I still have grants and graduate students and expect to do so long into the future. Most importantly, while at UMass Amherst, I was part of the original Safer Sim effort. Here you see some of our UPRM team at a TRB poster session. There's Ben Colucci in the center, Didier Valdez sandwiched between me and David Hurwitz, and of course Mike Nodler at UMass Amherst. Having participated in Safer Sim 1, I am familiar with much of what was done, and have done my best to become acquainted with what is being proposed as part of Safer Sim 2, including a focus on automated vehicles technology, connected vehicles technology, vulnerable road users, roadway infrastructure design, and distributed simulation technology. Part 1, Introduction. As a webinar, I'm hoping you feel free to interrupt whenever you get a chance. I can't see your questions or your hands being raised, but Jacob can, and he'll read to me the questions. At the end of each section, I'll give a little summary, so those of you who have been otherwise occupied can catch up on what was just covered, and we can dip into the next section. I wish you were out in the room. I really do. I'd love to see all your smiling faces. But all I have in front of me is my PowerPoint slide. I don't even have my head in the box. So if you catch me doing something strange, Jacob or anyone, let me know. So why are we all here today? This video is all many of us need to remind us of why we are here. It's disturbing, so if you don't want to look, that's fine. Keep your eyes on the left. Video is disturbing. The pedestrian was struck. Obviously, the bus driver, as you can see here, wanted to make sure that she did not hit vehicles in the opposing lane, forgetting that indeed a pedestrian could be crossing from the left. And scenes like this get repeated again and again. These three pedestrians are about to be struck by a car whose approaching headlights you can see to the left of the slide. You see the pedestrians thrown into the air and scattered on the street. The video itself is too traumatizing to watch repeatedly, but you can find it on YouTube. It's important for safety reasons. In the United States alone, there were 42,000 deaths in 2016, a 14% increase over 2014. And worldwide, you may have seen these figures. I'm not sure how many of you have. The number of fatalities has been constant through 2014. Unfortunately, I don't have any of the more recent estimates. Roughly at 1,250,000, with the highest fatality rates in the low-income countries. Consistent with the above, almost half of all deaths on the world's roads are among the most vulnerable users. Motorcyclists, 23%. Pedestrians, 22%. Cyclists, 4%. So back to the title. It's not just us. The research you do as part of Symposium has implications not only for transportation systems in the United States, but also for the safety of the transportation systems around the world. You are a powerful voice and agent for international change. I will speak to this issue at various points throughout the presentation. In summary, I've presented a more international picture because we may need to look abroad for solutions to our problems at home. In fact, we may need to implement our solutions abroad before we can expect them to take root here. I speak now with my Volpe hat on, where I worry not only about identifying a problem and constructing countermeasures, my primary concerns when I was on the faculty, but also about getting those countermeasures out into the field. I know a concern that you share every bit as much as do I. Okay, part 2, trust and reliance. The most common type of fatal crash is a lane departure where, say, the driver runs off the road and hits a tree, or the driver runs headlong into another vehicle. There are various engineering solutions to this problem. They include lane departure warning systems and lane keeping assist systems, as well as infrastructure additions like Jersey barriers and the commonly used guardrails. These engineering solutions to the problems of unintended lane departures that I just described are good. Sometimes they lead to extraordinary improvements in safety. But here is the rub, and I love the cartoon. I use it whenever I can. As each of us is all too well aware, unless we know how operators interact with the new systems may provide some, but not all, of the safety benefits that we would like. So what's been the story with lane departure warning systems? Well, as most of you know, or many of you know, one of the problems with the lane departure warning systems, as indicated in a recent Insurance Institute of Highway Safety study, is that they found about 2/3 of the users turned the feature off. What makes the lane departures warning? Basically false alarms, either those caused by the technology or inadvertently by the driver. The technology, irregular lane markings, curvy roads, or even sunlight warming the car can all cause an alert to activate. One false alarm. But the driver, who is less likely to use his or her turn signal, tends to find the alerts issued and therefore his or her annoyance level raised because they intended to turn, they intended to get out of the lane, and they didn't need the lane departure warning. So what do I see as Safer Sim's role here? Well, one answer might be to compare performance in an ideal world, one you see pictured here, with the performance in the real world as we know it. In that ideal world, the lane departure system would deliver a warning every time a lane departure occurred, and never when a lane departure did not occur. So we could study drivers' performance if the system were ideal. The Minnesota Department of Transportation decided to fund a study to evaluate lane departure warning systems in that ideal world and the world as it exists. A gust of wind was randomly inserted into a simulator drive. The lane departure warning either sounded every time the car got pushed out of the lane, 100%, 90% of the time, or 70% of the time. To be clear, they were investigating misses here, not false alarms, but the study is still relevant to our discussion of trust. Here are the results. You can see my pointer, I was told. The total time out of lane in seconds was actually greatest for the 90% system, the system that was midway between the least reliable system and the most reliable system, 100%. Why? These technologies cannot and will not achieve their full benefit unless we understand how the driver interacts with them. Why? I don't know. But we're better to study the effect of warning reliability on driver trust and reliance on automation in potentially unsafe condition than driving simulators. Safer Sim is beautifully poised to do this.
Don, can I interrupt you? We have a question here from Sue Chrysler.
Yes.
She's
Yeah,
wondering
hi,
who
Sue.
did that study, and when.
It was the Minnesota Department of Transportation. I think it was done just a couple years ago, and the study was actually done at the University of Minnesota, and I can get you that publication citation. Thanks, Sue, for asking. I did not put it down. It's the bottom of my slide, but I have the deck open now. I can't see it. Okay, so I'll get that to you. Thanks. Okay, so we see there that indeed the warnings don't scale monotonically. Surprisingly, those with the mid-level warning are doing the worst. Although lane departures are the most common cause of fatal crashes, there are many other crashes with many other types of warning systems. The issues that John Lee and Christina C. raised back in 2004 about automation, and addressed by many others since then, including Bill Horry and others out there in Safer Sim, are still with us, very much with us. Have we really addressed adequately the question of how to provide drivers with the appropriate resolution? Have we really addressed adequately the question of how to make sure that drivers are correctly calibrated? These are questions Lee and C raised, and I don't think we yet know how to provide drivers with that calibration. And if we don't, then we're in the situation where we're in today, where we get overtrust, distrust, or misuse. In short, I believe that there is still a huge amount of work to be done on trust and reliance by Safer Sim. Work focused on trust and reliance in the context of automated, connected, and intelligent vehicles. I hope none of you trust technology as much as does this pedestrian. So, what about Vietnam? My family traveled to Vietnam several years ago. Trust and reliance on automation was not much of a problem when kayaking in Ha Long Bay. But traffic was a nightmare. This is a right-hand drive country. It is typical for cars to be in the opposing lane on two-lane roads with bicycles and pedestrians on both sides, the bicyclists and pedestrians running for cover as fast as possible. I know this personally because I was in a taxi, a minivan, going from Ha Long Bay back to the airport in Hanoi, and we must have come within inches of tens, if not of hundreds, of pedestrians and bicyclists. Lane departure is a sport in Vietnam, and pedestrians and bicyclists are the victims. So how one might address the problem? How might one address the problem? Well, it turns out over 72% of the Vietnamese living in urban areas own smartphones. In theory, their smartphones could pick up the communications from a vehicle using vehicle-to-pedestrian communication. Safer Sim, pedestrian simulators like the one at the University of Iowa could potentially be used to study just how effective were V2P, vehicle-to-pedestrian communications. Joe Kearney would know better than I do whether that is a real possibility, but I'm assuming it is, and Safer Sim could have a role. The plot now thickens and circles back on itself. I started this section by discussing trust and reliance on automation using lane departure warning systems as an example. I said at the beginning of this talk I would introduce more global topics at various points. Well, I just did that. We were looking at lane departure warnings, and it turns out that indeed in Vietnam, it's actually vehicle to pedestrian warnings that we need, and we could address close to 50% of the deaths around the world. That's over 500,000 deaths with adequate V2P warning systems. But it is not only deaths outside the United States that such systems could address. At the beginning of the summer of 2014, I was talking with Hannah Freelow about her internship. That's Hannah there. She'd been a student in my human factors class that spring. She was bright, energetic, and filled with excitement about her summer internship. After emailing her that night, I next day read in the papers that she'd been struck and killed at night while walking on the side of the road with a friend. For what it is worth, the driver was not drunk or otherwise intoxicated. Her cause of death is probably typical of many of the deaths in low and middle income countries, pedestrians struck on the side of the road while walking home at night or during the day. V2P may have saved her life had it been available. In summary, here we found that when we looked abroad for help improving our lane departure warning systems, we found an entirely different problem. Close to 500,000 vulnerable road users are being killed annually in traffic crashes by those who are willfully departing their lanes. Trying to solve this problem, it became clear that vehicle-to-pedestrian warning systems were one solution, and solving the vulnerable road user problem abroad would help tremendously in reducing the number of increasing vulnerable road user fatalities at home. Part 3, distraction. Distraction is deadly on the highway. Everyone knows this. Visual manual distractions have long been recognized as the most deadly and documented as such in study after study. To give manufacturers guidance in determining whether their in-vehicle interfaces were the likely cause of visual manual distraction, in 2014, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, published guidelines for measuring the distracting potential of in-vehicle interfaces. What is perhaps noteworthy, especially for Safer Sim, is that NHTSA approved driving simulators as one way of evaluating whether an in-vehicle device should be locked out while driving. As an example of one lockout criteria, a testable task should be locked out from performance while driving unless for at least 21 of 24 test participants, no more than 15% of the total number of eye glances away from the forward scene have durations of greater than 2 seconds while performing the testable task one time. Let me repeat that. Imagine you've got an experiment, 24 participants. It must be the case that for no more than 15% of 21 of those participants, no more than 15% of their glances are longer than 2 seconds while they perform the task one time. It's not this particular test criteria I want you to focus on, and there are 2 other test criteria. It's that Safer Sim is poised now to be in the game where indeed manufacturers are evaluating whether their in-vehicle devices meet the NHTSA design guidelines. And they're guidelines, just that, they're not requirements. This is not an easy criterion to meet. Many of you have recorded videos very similar to this. The crosshairs are the fixation of the driver. When they move inside the vehicle, indeed, they're glancing down, performing some in-vehicle tasks. When they're outside the vehicle, they're, of course, on the forward roadway. It is clear looking at this that the glances of this participant were at least 2 seconds or longer most of the time. One of the glances was close to 6 seconds. And we find that this is true of most participants using in-vehicle control devices in their car. Well, the automobile manufacturers have responded in large part with an engineering solution. In this case, installing voice command systems in their cars, which let the driver operate the infotainment system without having to look down and inside the cabin of the automobile. Great! If the driver is not looking down inside the vehicle to control the car's functions, then the visual manual guidelines are not relevant. Or are they relevant? Rather than to solve the distraction problem, the use of voice command systems has just turned the focus from visual manual distraction to cognitive distraction. One would think that the effects of cognitive distraction on driver performance was a non-issue. Epidemiological, naturalistic, and simulator studies all show the dangers of cognitive distraction, such as cell phone conversations. The epidemiological and naturalistic studies suggest an increase in risk of 2 to 3 times. So you're probably saying to yourself, what's the problem? We allow cell phone conversations while driving. Why shouldn't we allow voice control commands while driving? Well, recent research by David Strayer at the University of Utah, funded by the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety, suggests that interactions with the voice command systems can be even more distracting than cell phone conversations. But just how distracting? Well, in Strayer's field study, drivers navigated a 7 to 9 minute loop through a residential neighborhood, shown on this slide. During the drive, the researchers evaluated the cognitive demands of simple voice-based vehicle controls with the interface, the infotainment system, such as dialing a 10-digit number, calling a contact, changing the radio station, or playing a CD. So they're out on the road and they're being asked to do these things with a voice command system. They also had a baseline condition when they weren't acting with the voice command system and a high workload condition. The high workload condition had them first evaluate a numeric statement, true or false. Then they saw a word. They had to read it. It was called the O-span task or the operation span task. This continued. They got another numeric fact in the high workload task, in the O-span task. Then they got another word. This went on for some time, after which they were asked to recall all of the words. The maximum number of words that can be recalled in this is the operation span. Okay, so they had a high workload condition, a low workload condition, and then 6 infotainment systems. You see them here. Ford had MyTouch, Chevy had MyLink, Chrysler had Uconnect, Toyota Entune, Mercedes Command, and Hyundai BlueLink. And here are the results. You can see my cursor. The low workload condition is on the left. They normalized that to 1. The high workload condition, the O-span task, is on the right. That was 5. Cell phone conversations are at 2.2. That corresponds to the Hyundai, roughly the Hyundai system. The 6 infotainment systems, including the Hyundai, are here between, on the left, 1.7 and Chevy, 3.7. What is notable is that voice control using the Chevrolet MyLink system led to a level of workload 3.7 that was greater than any of the other system interactions, almost twice that what it was for cell phone conversations. Do we really want our passenger cars placing a cognitive workload on the driver twice that of cell phones, which we know increase the crash risk, as I said, by 2 to 3 times? Well, in order to answer this question, we need to know the relation between the measure of workload and crashes. The workload that Strayer used was a composite measure of performance on a detection response task and the NASA TLX, among others. The detection response method consists of a simple task where participants respond to frequently presented stimuli in different modalities. So they might all be presented visually on a head-mounted display, a visual dot, or tactily, a stimulus to the foot. Unfortunately, to the best of my knowledge, no one knows the relation between the composite measure of workload for voice command systems and crashes. Oops. This is an area ripe for initial study on driving simulators, especially given the study reported in a British medical journal back in 2012. This study indicates that drivers engaged in mind wandering, and mind wandering here is right here, drivers engaged in mind wandering coupled with a highly distracting content, like what about interacting with your voice command system, had a higher adjusted odds ratio, crashes, than either sleep-deprived drivers or drivers impaired by alcohol. Well, where might one begin to look for a dependent measure that was more directly linked to crashes than the DRT, the detection response task? Well, we already know that hazard anticipation skills are linked to crashes. Could we possibly use something like hazard anticipation? We know hazard anticipation is incredibly sensitive to workload. Here you see the results from a study that John Lee, myself, and a number of others ran, comparing the hazard anticipation performance of drivers on and off the cell phone. The percent perceiving hazards on the cell phone is the light blue. The percent perceiving hazards not on the cell phones in the light blue, in dark blue is those on the cell phone. And what we see is, if you're on the cell phone, the likelihood you'll see a pedestrian on the left stepping out from behind a truck, if you're not on a cell phone, is 90%. Whereas if you are on a cell phone, that's the light blue bar, the likelihood is only 20%. So we're seeing almost a fourfold improvement in the likelihood of hazard anticipation. Maybe we could use this to investigate the effects of voice command systems. And now you ask, what about China? They have close to 2,500 traffic fatalities annually. 250,000 people die in traffic crashes. What can we learn by looking around the world about how one might get out information about voice command systems to the motoring public? Well, there are now many different countries that have new car assessment programs similar to what NHTSA now directs in the United States. Not only do these programs provide ratings of crashworthiness, but they also indicate which advanced driver assistance systems have established safety benefits. As a next step, SaferSim could think about interesting one of these international NCAP organizations in incorporating ratings of distraction potential of various voice command interfaces into their assessment. If these international organizations are willing to incorporate ratings of the workload of voice command systems of the different automobiles, so too then NHTSA may be willing to do such at some point. In summary, here we find that when we look abroad for help, there are many different new car assessment programs that might be willing to incorporate ratings of the cognitive workload associated with various voice command systems. Perhaps if we could get those international systems to consider incorporating such a rating system into their NCAP programs, we here in the United States could more easily push for the establishment of such a rating system into our own NCAP programs. Part 4, Training and Education. Automated vehicles. The driver in Montana with this automated vehicle crash was headed from Seattle to Yellowstone National Park when he crashed on a two-lane highway near Caldwell. Neither the driver nor his passenger were injured in the crash, but it was serious enough that the car lost its front passenger side wheel. It was a winding road going through a canyon with no shoulder. The driver told the trooper investigating the crash that the car was in autopilot mode, traveling between 55 and 60 miles per hour, when it veered to the right and hit a series of wooden stakes on the side of the road. Tesla confirmed that the data from the car shows it was in autopilot mode, but the driver did not likely have his hands on the wheel, despite several warnings to do such. Clearly, some training is needed. The National Council and the University of Iowa started My Car Does What to educate drivers about safety features in vehicles today. It's a beautifully constructed website. Congratulations. It has sections on various features, safety features, videos and graphics, deeper learning and games, just to mention a few. The deeper learning section has two subsections, one on understanding. For example, I've blown up a graphic here. Here are the parts of the typical forward collision warning system. It also has a deeper learning second subsection, the challenge subsection. The top text reads, some forward collision warning systems are not able to detect some obstacles or even vehicles because of their size or shape. When driving in areas where bicycles, motorcycles, and other small vehicles are common, you should not rely on your forward collision warning system. Would most drivers know that? I doubt it. Is this important information? Absolutely. And the text at the bottom reads, what should you do? Imagine yourself driving the blue car on the city street to the right. Think about the questions below. If the pedestrian in front of you crosses the street, how will your forward collision warning system respond? What should you do? At this point, however, we need to ask ourselves how much of an effect such a program might have on reducing drivers' crash risk. The quick answer, as far as I know, is that we do not yet understand what the effects might be of such a program. If we look at the past 50 years of driver education, up until 2015, we might be inclined to say the effect will be marginal at best on crashes. Study after study has showed no effect of driver education, especially those that focused on novice drivers. However, a recent study by NHTSA reported in 2016 suggests that driver education can reduce crashes, at least among males. 5,000 drivers between the ages of 16 and 18 in the state of California were included in the study. 20 were given hazard anticipation training for 17 minutes, 2,500 were given no training. They were followed for over a year. RAP-trained males, the trained males, showed approximately a 23.7% lower crash rate relative to the male comparison group, no training. The reduction was statistically significant. For females, the RAP group had an estimated 10.7% higher crash rate, but the increase was not statistically significant. Not only does one need to worry about the different effects that training might have on males and females, at least with novice drivers, but not unrelated, one needs to worry about the different effects that training might have on risk-seeking and risk-averse drivers. On the left, you see careful or risk-averse drivers. On the right, you see careless or risk-seeking drivers. Lisa Zhang, a postdoc in our lab, recently found that hazard anticipation training was not highly effective for the risk-averse drivers, but was effective for the risk-seeking drivers. So these are the trained drivers. They anticipated 84% of the hazards, whereas the untrained drivers anticipated only 58%. There was no difference in the trained and untrained drivers when they were careless or risk-seeking. Safer Sim can play a critical role here, evaluating the effect of a program such as My Car Does What on driving simulators, and determining whether the training is equally effective for males and females and equally effective for risk-seeking and risk-averse drivers, and equally effective for older and younger drivers. Not only will we need to learn how effectively to train drivers to learn the various features of automation, but we will also need to train them how to stay alert when they are asked to do very little in the level 2 automation and level 3 automation. This is a huge problem. Safer Sim has a gigantic role to play here. And now that you ask, what about Robin Hood? Many of you, some of you, may recognize David Crundle on the right. David is leading efforts in England and around the world to incorporate hazard anticipation testing into the licensure process. We're standing in front of a statue of Robin Hood in Nottingham, England, where my wife and I were visiting this summer. The question I raise here, as I did at the end of the other sections, is what we could learn from the world around us that might help us take our research from theory to practice. The answer in this case is that when we look around the world, we could learn from people like David how to incorporate testing into the licensure process in different countries. There's no reason that a test of drivers' understanding of the features of automated vehicles could not be part of the licensure process as well. Hazard anticipation testing is part of the licensure process in these countries around the world and now more. What about putting the testing of the understanding of automated vehicle features into that process? Again, in summary, when we look around the world for what to do and ways to provide solutions, we can see that other countries have introduced a new testing, hazard anticipation testing, into the licensure process. We can look to them for how to introduce a new testing, the testing of automated vehicle processes, automated vehicle technologies into the licensure process here in this country. The environment outside the car, part 4, the last part. The environment outside the car has a huge influence on the driver, whether it be the weather, the traffic signals, or the roundabouts. This is my favorite roundabout. It's in Amherst near Akin Farm. Any of you remember that? My daughter and I will go round and round many times. With respect to weather, the University of Central Florida has used their driving simulator to evaluate how drivers respond to low visibility warnings of fog ahead. The factors for their experiment that were manipulated included 2 fog levels, moderate fog and dense fog, and 3 warning types: no warning, image warning only on the head-up display, and image and audio warning. These are the results from the study by the University of Central Florida. It was found that fog warning systems can significantly improve road safety. Significant differences there, you'll notice, were observed for the time to initial throttle release by warning type. And the short of it is no warning. The drivers in the no warning condition were longer to release the throttle than were drivers with either a HUD-only warning or a HUD and audio warning. Interestingly, age effects were observed during the braking process. Older drivers were prone to brake harder than other drivers. This is a beautiful example of analyzing the effect of an advanced driver assistance system, fog warning. But of course, we are still left with more questions. It is my belief that research in the future needs to move up a level. We need to address the question of just how many alerts are too many. Safer Sim is ideally positioned to answer this question. Let's turn to traffic signals. Faculty at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the University of Massachusetts Amherst have undertaken an extensive program of research to evaluate the safety benefits of flashing yellow arrow, permissive only, left turn indications. There are your flashing yellow arrow indications. That work first started on driving simulators, and I think began with Mike Knoedler and his dissertation. There has also been a recent field evaluation, given the successful results of Mike's works and others on the flashing yellow arrow on simulators. There's been a successful field evaluation of the effect of flashing yellow arrows on crashes at intersections undertaken at the University of Wisconsin. The findings were drawn from the analysis of 50 intersections in which left turn FYA indications were installed, FYA, flashing yellow arrow. Interestingly, Safety was improved at intersections that already operated with protected permissive left turn, PPLT phasing, prior to implementation of the flashing yellow arrow permissive only indication. Safety was not improved at intersections that operated with protected only left turn phasing prior to field implementation of the FY indication with the protected permissive left turn phasing. What is this an example of? It's an example of the cycle of research. We started with research on a driving simulator, not wanting to expose drivers to potential risks in the field with a field implementation of the flashing yellow arrow. We then moved to the field. And after a number of intersections had the FY indication installed, we were ready to evaluate it. And it does yield reduction in crashes, but only in certain cases. Field studies are limited. One cannot study what is not limited. That's why we have driving simulators. The cycle of research is ready to begin again. We need to understand what additional things need to be done with the flashing yellow arrow to make it effective, not only when the PPLT is there, but also when we have an existing protected only indication. Finally, let's turn to a study of toll plaza geometry and signage completed by the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez, and UMass Amherst. The purpose of this study was twofold. First, it was to determine whether drivers in Massachusetts would behave the same as drivers in Puerto Rico when confronted with toll plazas with which they were and were not familiar. The UPRM simulator is there. The UMass simulator is here. They're both RTI, but as you can see, they're not identical. Here's the toll plaza geometry that was modeled at UMass Amherst. The toll plaza geometry that was modeled in Massachusetts. This is the real thing. This is the model. Both models were used tested at Amherst and UPRM. Here's the toll plaza geometry in Puerto Rico. There's the real geometry, the real toll plaza. Here's the model geometry. The bottom line is a good one. The behavior of drivers who were not familiar with a toll plaza didn't change across the toll plazas. So the Massachusetts drivers navigated the Puerto Rican toll plazas equally effectively as did the Puerto Rican drivers, and conversely. A second goal was to determine whether re-signing the toll plaza would improve drivers' behavior. And here you see 1, 2, 3 lanes, and they're approaching this toll plaza from the left to the right, and there are 5 zones where we took measures. Here's the treatment condition where we give them information, where they were given information ahead of time on what the lanes were. So in the previous one, they weren't given that information. In this one, until the very end. In this one, they're given it far upstream. And the bottom line is that in the treatment condition, the performance of subjects was improved by 33% for unfamiliar drivers and 23% for familiar drivers. And overall, the overhead signage configuration has the potential to improve safety by 50%. Because of the horrific damage to Puerto Rico's infrastructure, there now is an unprecedented opportunity to use driving simulators to test out various new road geometries before construction begins anew. SaferSim could be central to this effort. Today's simulators are more powerful than they were 20 years ago. Here at UMass Amherst, some 20 years ago, we modeled 173 lane miles of highway infrastructure known as the Big Dig. We had to map 10-foot by 10-foot interval, all those 173 lane miles. Now you can take CAD drawings and incorporate them directly into the program. We also modeled this incredible spaghetti, plate of spaghetti that was the roadway structure at Logan International Airport. Again, we had to do that by hand. You can now do that with the CAD drawings, easily importing it. What's the Safer Sim challenge? The Safer Sim challenge is as follows. I don't know how Safer Sim can pull together to help speed the repair and rebuilding of highway infrastructure in Puerto Rico, in Florida, and in Texas, but I'm convinced it can be done. And where there is a will, there is a way. Part 6, conclusion. I've described 4 areas where I think Safer Sim is currently involved with new technologies which I think are the most promising. They include trust and reliance on automation, visual, manual, and cognitive distraction, training and education with automated vehicle technologies and automated vehicles, and the environment outside the car. And for each of these, I have identified what I think are the next major questions. In terms of trust and reliance, I indicated that there was still a long road to travel. One we still need to much better understand resolution and calibration. In terms of distraction, I said that cognitive distraction, and in particular now voice commands, were critical to understand. In terms of training and education, I pointed to the need to evaluate the effect of programs already in place that are designed to teach people about the limits of automated technologies. And with respect to the environment outside the car, I pointed to the need to investigate the effect of multiple alarm systems, to go back to the lab and better understand the effects of flashing yellow arrows, and to provide solutions to the rapidly evolving highway infrastructure problems in Puerto Rico, Florida, and Texas. And for many of these additional paths forward, I have argued that we may need to turn our attention outward towards what is being done in other countries in order fully to realize the benefits of these technologies, not only here in the United States, but around the world. Mike, I hope you appreciate this. The end. Okay, Jacob, 45 minutes turned into 47. I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry, Dr. Fisher. That was an excellent presentation, and thank you for all the insight. I guess we will open it up for any questions here at the end.
Hi, Mohammed. I see your question. I see Mike typing. Wow, I didn't know that. That's fantastic. Are you able to describe a little bit of? Good. I'm glad, Mike. No, but are you able to describe a little bit of that for me? Jacob, can I hear and can others hear if Mohammed gets the phone or no? He can't. That doesn't happen easily.
I would have to make him a presenter, and if he has a microphone ready, we could. I'll let that be up to Muhammad if that's available.
Mohammed, do you want to share that? He may not have his microphone on.
Yeah.
Raise your
Okay,
hand
hey.
if you do. Yeah.
He said, "Yep, I will make you a presenter here then, Muhammad. You can unmute or connect your mic at the top of the window."
When people see it there, that's what you need to just pop that open and you'll, oh, that's not the webcam. This is the mic. Sorry. Do we have any communication, Jacob?
I am unable to hear anything from him yet. It might take a little bit to actually connect his microphone.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yep, we can hear you, Dr. Muhammad.
Okay, great. Don, that's a great presentation. Thank you. Very inspiring.
Oh, it's your work. Let me be very clear. It's your work, Safer Sim's work, that inspired me. But thank you for your comment.
Yes, yes, sir. But you put everything in perspective, and I really enjoyed it. And I think it will make a big difference in how we proceed. And I mentioned Tongji because you have added in your presentation the international perspective, which indeed I agree with you. We can learn a lot from other countries, particularly countries that have pedestrian problems, for example. and other problems that they had been facing for a long time. I think we can learn from them. The issue with Tongji is that we did put it in the last proposal after I checked with them that they are very interested to collaborate with us because they are putting a lot of emphasis on simulation. And I'm not sure if you know that they have now the third best simulator in the world after NAD's Toyota. The simulator comes third. Very impressive.
I'm jealous.
Tongji is in Shanghai.
I'm jealous. Where is Tongji?
It is one of the best. Yeah.
I thought so. I think my postdoc. Yeah, my postdoc Lisa Zhang was offered a
If
position
you
there. Unfortunately, she
want to
didn't take it.
visit or anyone want to visit, 3 of my former PhD students are faculty there now. So I have good relationship with them, and
Wow.
they have
Yeah.
asked several times to be not working, at least sharing information with us, comparing drivers between different countries. Once they even asked if we would like to do experiments there. They are willing to make the simulator available if we want to do an experiment. So they are really interested. I did invite a professor and his students for our next symposium, which will be February 4 to 6. They promised to see if they can send someone, particularly they are being at TRB in January, so whether it's feasible for one of them to come back in February. Anyway, they are interested to collaborate with us, so it is us now to determine how can we benefit from this possibility, whether we do a joint experiment or a comparative experiment, or whether we should ask for something specific. But you really brought a good point, and I wanted to tell you that we have been trying to get this international perspective.
If I can help in any way, let me know. That sounds fantastic. Obviously, I'm not now a member of the Symposium 2, but
Thanks again,
I would
Bob.
love to help do anything I could to move that forward. Thank you for attending today's.
And Dr. Fisher, I don't know if you saw,
Oh,
we
you're
have
welcome.
the Hank Lab,
Okay,
Joe
you're
Carney,
welcome.
and he's got his researchers in the lab with him, but they mentioned that they've done 2 safer sim experiments on alerts and warnings for pedestrians, and they're hoping to present that at TRB this year.
Well, can you give us a little hint? Are we going to be able to prevent 50% of the pedestrian deaths around the world? Joe, what's it look like? Good or bad news?
And so he's typing. Joe, if you do have a mic available, I could bump you up to presenter if you'd like to. Just let me know. We also have, okay, he said, sure, I'm going to bump him up to a presenter. All right, there you go. Joe, you can connect your microphone and that should be good to go.
There you go.
Okay, am I on?
Yep.
Oh, excellent. Hey, hi, Don. We're here. There are, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 7 of us here in the lab and enthralled by your talk. So we've done 2 experiments. One looked at what we call permissive alerts. So what those do is they tell a pedestrian when it's safe to cross, when there's a sufficiently large gap to cross. And what we found is that substantially improves crossing performance for texting pedestrians. But the downside is that they adapt to it very quickly and rely on it very heavily, and so they rarely look at the road. So we're concerned about loss of situational awareness and overdependency in the face of possible technical failures.
Oh. Wow. I'm glad you guys are leading the charge there before such alerts get out in the commercial world, then indeed we're stuck with pedestrian deaths because people come to over rely on it. What's your sense of the
I
net
think we have
benefit,
to look
Joe?
more at different
Fewer people
conditions and
killed
different
even with high
situations,
reliance on it,
and
or no,
do
it
a
could
little bit,
be a
and
negative
also
net benefit.
different groups of subjects. So we're currently putting together a proposal to look at elderly to see if it can help them, because we know that they have difficulty crossing, particularly at unsignalized intersections. The other thing we did is we did the complementary kind of an alert, a warning system. The warning system provides an alarm when you start to cross a dangerously small gap. And there we found that it increased safe crossing. But the surprising thing is once people started moving, if they got an alarm, even on a very small gap, they kept crossing. They just don't. And we've run this experiment twice. They don't reverse motion and step out of the roadway, even though it's a highly risky crossing. So on a third of those crossings, they got virtually hit by a car. So we're trying to understand, we're trying to understand how warnings influence. It may be that the cost of reprogramming a motion once started is just too high to be effective, particularly on a one-lane crossing that we do in our simulators. So any thoughts or ideas about how we could advance this research, we'd sure appreciate.
Oh, that's really, really exciting. And as I said, it is true that half a million vulnerable users a year die around the world.
Good, thanks.
Half of those being pedestrians. So it's really important work. Thank you for sharing it. I look forward to your talk, Tiber.
Okay, do we have any other questions here? Still have a few minutes here for this first session if we need to. We do plan on starting with the new project kickoff presentation. So these will be the new projects that are beginning under this second Safer Sim grant.
Well, let me just conclude by saying I miss everyone, but life turned in a different direction than I expected, and so it's a real delight being able to present at the beginning of Safer Sim 2. You were really part of my life for the 5 years.